Episode 433. Don't underestimate Bessy. She thought about it and added another sentence. A bunch of people are coming to the White family's banquet. You will have big news to scoop out. Clarissa was a reporter for all sorts of segments. She was a war reporter, a paparazzi, and a news reporter. Her presence was felt in most industries. She would surely like to mix with the White family, whose news couldn't be discovered often. Within 2 seconds, Clarissa called. She was also in Evanston, running around for the news. Pressing down her baseball cap, she laughed. You have an invitation to the White family's banquet? Wow, I was still trying to figure out how to get in with my identity as a reporter. After exchanging a few more words, she hung up and stuffed her phone into her pocket. It's Lone Wolf indeed. Clarissa, what invitation is it? Asked another reporter beside her. Nothing important. She flashed him a light smile. She waved her hands dismissively. In the laboratory, Dean Soup and the others watched as the black car left. He frowned and said in a deep tone, Dr. Weatherby, what do you think is going on in the Research Institute? What's with the excessive flattery? Although Bessy had the power, being firmly placed in the deputy second-level researcher position from the very beginning was a little too unrealistic. After all, the deputy second-level researcher was on par with most old men in the Research Institute. She was certainly a rare genius domestically, but weren't they afraid that she would become arrogant with such excessive praise and honor at such a young age? What if she started neglecting her experiments? An ordinary third-level researcher was her current standard. Dean Soup had some doubts about the intentions of the senior staff in the Research Institute. I don't know. I'm not really in the loop about the Research Institute. Dr. Weatherby groaned after a long pause. The deputy second-level position is indeed high, and it might be an issue if it had been anyone but Bessy. How do you know it won't be an issue for her? Who knows if the Research Institute will give her an ordinary second level in the future? Dean Soup turned sideways with his hands behind his back. Pausing, Dr. Weatherby turned to Dean Soup and coughed twice. You are busy with your own business, so you probably haven't been keeping up with the gossip online. Bessy is a smash hit on the internet. What was it again? Playing in the match with OST team already earned her the reputation of God Miller. She's even a student of Mr. Grint. If she's so easily led astray with high praises, she won't be Bessy anymore. Although he wasn't certain about the details, he still knew how deep the waters were. No matter what, if the people behind this really wanted Bessy to fail from becoming too arrogant, he could only say that they hadn't investigated all of her actions fully. Even while adored by millions of people, BM didn't become arrogant. How could she become arrogant just by becoming a deputy second-level researcher? Dr. Weatherby sneered. That person might have underestimated Bessy. Dean Soup definitely wouldn't read gossip, but he had heard others discuss Bessy lately. His children at home and the students in school discussed her often. He had also followed the trend and watched the news. Bessy's performance had conformed to the norms, and he hadn't felt like it was out of line. Especially that physics question that made Dean Soup doubt the IQ of the program group. He didn't understand the poker tournament, but felt relieved after hearing what Dr. Weatherby said. He thought of how overly calm and cool Bessy had been today. Bessy returned to the Highline apartments. Marvin also happened to come back with Mary's father, holding 2 bags happily. He looked up when he saw Bessy and Michael. Miss Miller, take a look at the new species I cultivated with Mary's father. It's definitely harder than the previous one. He opened the bag and carefully took out the flower pot inside to show it to her. Glancing at it, she thought the potted flower did look a little more energetic. You're very talented. With one hand in his pocket, Michael also walked over to take a look and laughed softly.
It's really not bad. The Smith family has found a good gardener.
Marvin straightened his back. He solemnly placed the flower pot back. After finishing the arrangement, he thought of something.
By the way, Miss Miller, someone delivered this in the afternoon.
He handed her a box. She opened it while heading upstairs. It was the invitations from Principal White. She had given him the guest list that afternoon. Clarissa's invitation was only decided just now and would take longer to arrive. She went downstairs to change clothes and took out the invitations for Rosemary and Joshua. Then she went to the Clark family's house with Michael.
Aren't you taking a nap?
Downstairs, Michael had yet to change his clothes. He casually poured a glass of water and slowly drank from it. Bessy shook her head. No, Rosemary's been waiting for me. She raised her hand to check the time. It was nearing 7 p.m.
Why are you afraid of her?
Wrinkling his brows and putting down his glass, he reached out to rub Bessy's head. He squinted and muttered,
They're not in a hurry. What's wrong with letting them wait a while?
Marvin had already started the car. The two of them went downstairs together. There was no traffic today, so they arrived within half an hour. They walked past the promenade and took about 5 minutes to reach the lobby. A crowd of people was already seated at the dining table. Rosemary, Aaron, and a few security guards who weren't in Austria were also there. Knowing that Bessy was busy, the meal was set for 8 p.m., so Joshua hadn't come yet. The crowd gathered together to discuss Mr. White's sudden succession ceremony.
I heard that Mr. White's successor isn't from the White family, but from another family.
A senior executive frowned.
The White family definitely does not agree with his decision. I fear they're unstable. Another family?
Aaron paused and looked up at the man.
Are you sure? He doesn't want to give such a big research institute to Kenneth, but an outsider instead?
He asked in a solemn voice. What was his intention? Did he think the White family was too powerful?
It should be.
The elderly man nodded.
I don't know what the White family's plan is. In short, 2 days later, I'm afraid the entire capital will be shaken up.
The big families in Evanston had always been very stable and experienced little changes in power. But Mr. White's successor was an outsider. The entire city of Evanston was going to be blown up. If it was true, he would wait and see how the successor survived in the vortex. It would be fine if he had a supporter, but if not... As they were talking, Bessy and Michael came in. Bessy held her phone in one hand and the invitations in the other. Episode 434. Sincerely Yours.
Mr. Clark, Miss Miller.
The other security guards stood up immediately and greeted them respectfully. The people at the dining table couldn't help but cast their eyes on Bessy. Their curiosity was mixed with rare respect. Aaron felt suffocated just seeing them. News of the 4 major families of the Research Institute returning to Austria had already been circulating. They were naturally no strangers to Bessy. If the Clark family had cast sidelong glances at her last time because of the show, her violin skills and the final exams, this time they were simply in awe of her because of the waves she had made in the academic world. It wasn't unusual for there to be a top scorer in the final exams every year. As for the violin, the Clark family didn't really place much value on it. But Austria... With 1 ounce of effort, she managed to let the Research Institute return to Austria's field of vision, and even opened up a market in Evanston. This was enough for the other security guards of the Clark family to see her strength and potential. They knew she had endless potential in the future. It was no surprise that she would reach the position of a senior in the Research Institute. This point alone was enough to make them respect her. "Sorry I'm late." Bessy bowed her head after greeting them one by one. No. Rosemary crossed her legs and looked down at her phone. "There's still half an hour left. Jack, tell them to serve the dishes." The dishes were served one by one. Rosemary talked about Austria with Joshua and Bessy. "It's so late. Why don't you stay here tonight? There will be several beautiful rooms in my wing." Rosemary held her fork and looked at her with a smile. "There will be a fireworks show in the evening." Bessy paused and slightly turned to look at Michael. He casually peeled a small shrimp and stuffed it into her mouth. "Then stay tonight. You have the day off tomorrow, right? It's on the way to see Uncle as well," he said lazily. Bessy was really tired from these past 2 days and didn't bother to continue this conversation. Upon receiving this news, both Rosemary and Joshua were very excited. Sitting on the side, Aaron wasn't in a good mood. After dinner, Rosemary eagerly took Bessy to see the wing. Bessy handed over 2 invitations to Rosemary and Joshua. "The date is set for March 1st. Rosemary casually accepted it and didn't open it in front of her. Right now, she was excited about preparing for Bessy to stay in her wing. She led her to the wing in her high heels. Michael put his hands behind his head and lazily followed them. His wing wasn't far. He was rather calm and unhurried. "March 1st? Aaron and the other hallmasters were still at the dining table when they heard this and looked up at Joshua. "Miss Miller also has a banquet?"
"It seems so."
Banquets were held often this time of year, and they often conflicted with each other. This happened a lot. Most people picked the important one to go to, and sent a representative for the less important ones. "Dad, are you pushing the White family's successor's banquet back?" Aaron's expression changed. Although he knew that his father had always favored Michael and Bessy, he didn't expect him to become this demented. The others paused upon hearing that. They remained silent while staring at Joshua, but their expressions were obviously in disagreement with him. The White family was no trivial matter. Joshua casually waved his hand.
"I have my limits."
With his hands behind his back, he walked to his study room through the corridor. Simons pushed the reading glasses on the bridge of his nose and waited for Joshua to stop at the desk before he paused.
"Sir, you also think it's inappropriate?"
Joshua glanced at him. Standing 7 steps away, Simons pursed his lips upon hearing this. Naturally, he felt like Bessy was more important. But the family members wouldn't feel the same. The White family had risen very quickly in the past year with the momentum of the Clark family. Mr. White's successor was certainly an important affair, and Joshua would certainly be given an invitation as well. If he wasn't present, the impact would be significant. Seeing that Simons was silent, Joshua lowered his head, deep in thought. Someone knocked on the door outside.
"Come in."
Without looking up, Joshua opened the invitation. The security guards entered and sincerely said, "Sir, please think twice about the White family's matters." They couldn't be blamed for being nervous. Because of Michael, Joshua's bottom line was repeatedly discounted, and he made unprecedented decisions. The Clark family and even the whole of Evanston were already used to it. Otherwise, the name Joshua Clark wouldn't shake the entire city of Evanston. Forget about the things that didn't endanger the Clark family. Now, Joshua's decision would somewhat endanger the friendship between the Clark and White families. They finished speaking and still didn't see any reaction from Joshua. He was looking down at the invitation in his hands, which seemed to be shaking. The security guards exchanged glances.
"Sir?"
Simons called and took a step forward. Joshua still didn't react.
"Joshua?"
Simons called again. Only then did Joshua react. Slamming the invitation down, he hurried out of the study without saying anything. Behind him, Simons and the other staff members were all confused. Simons had followed Joshua the longest and immediately realized something was wrong with the invitation. He walked to the desk, picked up the invitation, and took a look. His hands also paused while holding the edge of the invitation, and his pair of muddy eyes shrank sharply. Simon's reaction was strange, too. The other staff members were anxious.
Simons, what on earth happened? What does Joshua mean? Everyone, don't worry about which banquet Mr. Clark has to attend.
He took a deep breath and showed the invitation card to them. The words on the gilded invitation were obvious. Invitation, Mr. Clark, on March 1st. Everyone skipped past the middle line and focused on the lower left corner. Sincerely yours, Eric White. Everyone in the study fell silent. Simons could hear his own breathing. Eric White, the name of the White family member who was in charge of 2 powers. Episode 435. The Start of Banquet.
Simons, this...
The other staff members stared at him and were stunned for a long time.
Is this the invitation card Miss Miller gave Joshua?
Simons slowly nodded. His mind was blank. Joshua had held on to the invitation card given by Bessy without putting it down, so there was no mistake. After a long while, one of the hallmasters came to his senses and glanced at the others, speechless.
So, Miss Miller invited Joshua on March 1st to the White family's house? She's the successor that Mr. White wants to pick?
Everyone else had thought of this as well. News of the White family choosing a successor had been enough to shake the top powers of the entire capital. Several people were trying to find out who this successor was. Most people didn't believe that Mr. White would give the research institute to an outsider who had nothing to do with the White family. But now, this thing is a big deal. Everyone exchanged glances. Returning to his senses, Simons closed the invitation and looked sideways at the people in the study, his expression serious.
I hope this will not get out before March 1st.
Bessy was an outsider and would trigger the White family's jealousy no matter how strong she was. No wonder Mr. White had kept silent about this. Bessy would really be in danger if the White family found out of this beforehand. By then, even Mr. White might not be able to protect her. Fortunately, Bessy had Michael and Joshua behind her.
Miss Miller is really...
Simons shook his head, slightly speechless. His heart was beating rapidly, echoing in his ears. Joshua and Rosemary sat in Rosemary's wing.
What are you talking about?
Forgetting about her demeanor, she abruptly stood up from her chair and stared at Joshua with wide eyes. She had yet to read the invitation from Bessy and had just settled her in. The moment she returned, Joshua told her the shocking news. She hurriedly picked up the invitation she had set aside on the table and turned it over. She reached the same conclusion as Simons. This piece of news was really enough to detonate the whole capital. At the same time, the Perez family was in Evanston. People like the Perez family, who had only just reached the edge of the pyramid, weren't even aware of the turbulence happening at the tip.
To the Miller family.
Grandpa Perez raised his glass and smiled at Darren.
Welcome to Evanston.
If it had been in the past when the Perez family was a few levels higher than the Smith family, even Elise would have been arrogant and bossy towards the Smith family. Naturally, the Perez family wouldn't be so enthusiastic about them. But now, there were Bessy and Anne, who had been loved by the son of the Miller family. Not to mention Thomas's current career success, The Perez family naturally had to respect the Smith family. After clinking glasses, Grandpa Perez turned to Anne.
Gabriel is taking you to a banquet in 2 days.
Although the Miller family was in decline compared to the other 4 major families, it was still a pinnacle that could only be looked up to by the Perez family. Yes, it's for the White family. Anne had finally figured out the situation in Evanston. The families mentioned by Mr. Anderson before were the 4 big families, including the Clark and White families. The White family was ranked second in the entire capital. Upon hearing this, everyone at the dining table cast enviable glances at her. Without showing any complacency on her face, she lowered her eyes, lightly picked up her fork, and tightened her fingers around it. She was well aware of her previously pessimistic situation, but the things on the internet weren't important. Only when power was held in your hands did it truly belong to you. Only the Clark and White families were considered hidden among all the rich. Now, she finally encountered the slightly deeper depth of the ocean. On March 1st, at 9:58 a.m. in the White family's house, an endless stream of people flowed at the entrance. Everyone came in separately and wasn't to be underestimated. While Mr. White prepared in the back, Kenneth, the next patriarch recognized by the White family, stayed at the gate. He received guests in the White family's grand banquet hall. Like Michael, he had made his name at a young age. Having managed major events for the White family, his methods didn't lose out to Mr. White's. A middle-aged man with a wine glass stood beside him. After welcoming one person, the middle-aged man found the opportunity to turn to Kenneth solemnly.
Kenneth, who on earth is the outsider that Eric wants to be his successor? Can he be trusted? How's his ability?
It was strange how tight-lipped Mr. White was about this. They had only found out the news of the successor and couldn't dig up anything further. They even implored the help of the Flake family. Had it not been for Mr. White saying he would entertain the guests today, nobody would have believed he had really found a successor.
Uncle.
Kenneth paused. He naturally knew that Mr. White didn't want to release Bessy's news in advance to protect her.
Don't worry. Her abilities won't disappoint you.
She was a student who just entered the school and became a deputy second-level researcher in March of the following year. Not to mention, her management abilities, even her accomplishments in physics, were absolutely astonishing. Seeing how determined he was, Kenneth's uncle paused and sighed.
You're obviously the best choice for the job. I don't know what Eric is thinking.
Kenneth lowered his eyes and said in a deep voice,
You don't need to get involved in this. Why don't you think about the itinerary in Austria coming up? He might let her come along.
Having said this, he also paused. According to how much value his grandfather placed on Bessy, he really might let her come along.
How could it be?
Asked Kenneth's uncle.
Eric never applied for an extra pass. It would take at least half a month. How could it be done within 2 days?
A pass was pertinent to go to the Moss family site. Otherwise, they couldn't even get out of the landing strip. As the two of them were talking, several people came in through the gates. It was Gabriel and the others. Falling 2 steps behind him, Anne entered and immediately saw several people she had only seen on TV. She subconsciously realized that this was a top banquet in Evanston. This banquet was so ostentatious that even Mr. Grint's apprenticeship banquet was incomparable. The banquet hall was packed with people. Gabriel led them to the head of the house.
Let's go and find Kenneth first.
Anne glanced at him. The next second, her feet seemed nailed in one spot, and she was completely out of it. This? Kenneth White? Episode 436. A Confrontation with Sherry. Kenneth wore a tightly buttoned black trench coat. His eyes were light, and he was speaking to someone with his head lowered. His expression was as cold as ever. Everyone around him nodded at him, indicating his status at this banquet hall. After graduation, Anne had only met him once in front of Northwestern University's campus. Since then, she hadn't paid much attention to him. Later, Kenneth asked some questions about her violin score twice, but because of what had happened online, she stopped contacting him. That is until he appeared in front of her today. She couldn't help but take a step back, staggering in her heels. Gabriel had already walked over to greet him. "Why are you here?" Her fingernails dug into her palm as she tried to calm herself. Kenneth kept his eyes low and glanced past her without indication that he recognized her in his eyes. He nodded slightly to Gabriel and his party. Despite being treated with extreme caution by the Perez and Smith families, Gabriel didn't feel neglected at all. Anne was ignored from beginning to end. "You know Kenneth?" At the side, her uncle looked sideways at her. "Oh, that's right. You and Kenneth are in the same year. He was in Chicago in his 3rd year of high school. You two probably went to school together." Anne nodded in a daze. Perhaps because of her relationship with Kenneth, Gabriel had become more patient with her. Seeing her slightly disappointed and surprised expression, he smiled a little. "It's normal for people like Kenneth not to remember you. He's the next patriarch of the White family and has been in charge of the family affairs for a year. Don't think too much about it." He spoke lightly, not knowing how much impact this brought on Anne. Back then, she had made insinuations at Kenneth. He had always lived a simple life, rode in Paul's car, and even lived in the community dormitory. Her brain hummed loudly, and everyone around her turned into a blur. Her ears buzzed. At 10:30 a.m., most of the people were already seated. Those sitting in the main and second seats were all from the 4 major families. Kenneth and the second generation were in the second seat. Joshua and the elders were in the main seats. Before the commencement of the ceremony, everyone spent time socializing. Besides the White and Clark families, no family could afford such a luxurious banquet. "My father still came." Aaron held a wine glass and smiled at his confidant. "It seems like he hasn't lost his mind because of my little brother and that girl." Neither Joshua nor Rosemary went to her banquet. In the past, even if they didn't both go, at least one of them would. With that said, it seemed like Joshua and Rosemary didn't take Bessy that seriously after all. Not far away, Michael and Bessy walked over. Aaron paused. He sneered. "These two came by themselves?" Those who came to this banquet were basically from the top circles. Most of them knew Michael, but weren't familiar with him. Other than Robert, few people dared to greet him. Bessy and Michael also sat on the second seat. The second seat sat more young people, including Kenneth's uncle. Kenneth was still entertaining the guests outside. "Mr. White," someone called Kenneth's uncle. "Who on earth is your brother's successor? Is it really not Kenneth?" Speaking of this, Kenneth's uncle shook his head calmly. "No, we don't have much news either." Not to mention everyone else. Even the White family was curious about who it was. While they were talking, Michael and Bessy arrived at their seats. Kenneth's uncle naturally knew Bessy, the great hero of the research institute who had limitless future achievements. "Bessy, no, I should call you Miss Miller to honor your research." Kenneth's uncle stood up, greeted Michael, and then very politely shook hands with Bessy. "I hope to work with you in the future." Most people at the dining table had also heard of Bessy, a hot character in Evanston. He turned to Michael. Michael was pulling out a chair for Bessy. Everyone who knew Michael, except for Aaron, was stunned. Bessy and Michael's relationship was known only to a few people in the Clark family. Too many things had been happening in Evanston recently, and most people's attention was on the White family in Austria. The other families didn't care about the love story of the promiscuous son of the Clark family. The rumors that had previously arisen in the circle remained as a girl bad in her studies and who had bought her way into university. No one knew the cause of this rumor, but it was said that the source was reliable, so most of them believed it. After all, what couldn't the gem of the Clark family do? Therefore, nobody paid much attention to his illicit love affairs after that. Until today. Bessy's basic information was no longer a secret in Evanston. Both her age and place of birth were in the same as the previous rumors. As for others, school slacker? She bought her way into university? Who on earth spread such a rumor? The ignorant people at the dining table were all stunned. Only Aaron's expression darkened. After a long while, the others finally reacted. Kenneth's uncle glanced at Bessy and asked about her teacher.
Have you found a teacher? I heard that Director Fielder has been asking about you.
Director Fielder? A soft voice came from behind, as light as a breeze. Upon hearing this voice, everyone except Michael and Bessy stood up and politely greeted Sherry. Not even Aaron was surprised.
Miss Flake.
Bessy realized that this was the one with a great reputation in Evanston and who was also Marvin's idol previously. She leaned back in her chair and glanced behind her. Sherry lightly glanced at her. In the next second, she turned to Kenneth's uncle and said generously, Director Fielder told me only 2 days ago that he has no plans of accepting a student for the time being. Upon hearing this, Aaron couldn't help but lower his head, concealing the sneer on his face. Episode 437. The successor to the Research Institute is... Having been successfully promoted as an intermediate member of 129, Sherry had taken root in the Flake family. She had made good ties with dozens of forces large and small in Evanston. Nobody would dare go against her. Unfortunately, the Flake family's background was insufficient. Even with Sherry, they could only temporarily squeeze out of the Miller family. Otherwise, the Flake family would have moved further up the rungs. Michael didn't speak much, and no one dared to provoke him. Most people were now talking to Sherry, and Bessy was now no longer the center of attention. At 10:58 a.m., Mr. White walked to the stage with his hands behind his back. The host first gave a speech to welcome everyone, then talked about the main event today.
Today is the ceremony for Mr. White's successor. It's also the first public appearance of the new successor.
He talked endlessly. At her seat, Bessy's face was expressionless. Did he understand what I meant by simple? He even invited a well-known host to liven up the atmosphere. Not bothered by the other people at the table, Michael poured her a cup of tea.
Don't be angry. Principal White might really be doing this on purpose.
Bessy glanced at him and took a sip of warm water. She didn't reply to him. Michael couldn't help but snigger. The host handed the microphone to Mr. White. Taking the microphone and pushing up his glasses, Mr. White said in a calm voice,
Please welcome my successor to the stage.
Everyone at the scene perked up, especially the White family. Without telling them anything, Mr. White had chosen the successor. Who knew if this successor was actually worthy? Could the new heir maintain the glory of the Research Institute? If this matter wasn't handled well today, and the successor found by Mr. White wasn't good enough, it would greatly reduce the prestige of the White family's direct line in the Research Institute. The White family was extremely nervous. On the stage, Mr. White's eyes fell on Bessy's table. Seeing her lowered head and sluggish movements, Mr. White knew in his heart that just like her grandfather, she was feeling annoyed by the complicated traditions. But he didn't feel like he had done anything wrong. If he hadn't held a big banquet today, Nobody would know how serious he was about this new successor.
Bessy Miller.
He looked up and calmly added. Some people had made guesses when they saw Mr. White looking in Bessy's direction, but they hadn't believed it. After all, this was the successor of Mr. White's research institute. The atmosphere was a little strange now that Mr. White had officially named his successor. Everyone's eyes were fixated on the table. Aaron stiffly turned to look at Bessy. As for Kenneth's uncle, he was still worried about whether Mr. White had found a reliable successor. But in the next second, he was completely frozen in place. Bessy stood up and took to the stage to accept the prosperous and complicated handover ceremony. Mr. White solemnly handed a copy of the seal to her and said in a solemn voice,
"The future of the Research Institute rests in your hands now."
Bessy raised her hand slowly. She initially promised to take over the Research Institute just to investigate her grandfather. But after experiencing so much, she realized that despite some scheming people in the Research Institute, most of them actually worked hard. Although the national flag of Austria had proved her worth, Bessy had felt the persistence of these researchers in just a few days. This secondary seal wasn't just a seal. It symbolized responsibility and faith. Taking a deep breath, she reached out to accept the seal.
"Don't worry."
Mr. White solemnly patted her shoulder. His muddy eyes slightly lit up. After a long time, he slowly said,
"If the Clark family and I can't protect you, then our families don't have any right to stay in Evanston. Let's go. I'll introduce you to some people."
Bessy couldn't feel his complicated mood and just followed behind him, Kenneth, and two other persons in charge of the White family. They started the toast from the main seats.
"You should be familiar with Joshua and President Flores, so there's no need for an introduction. This is the ambassador of our White family in Austria, Mr. Carlo."
Principal White solemnly introduced Mr. Carlo to Bessy. Mr. Carlo didn't know much English and just raised a toast to her.
"Mr. Carlo is a member of the Moss family in Austria. Mr. Grint surely knows him. Just remember him first. These forces in Austria will be important when the Research Institute connects with them."
Principal White briefly explained. They had reached the second seats. Principal White didn't seem to want to look at Michael and just politely introduced Sherry to her.
"Bessy, this is Miss Flake. She's the heir to the Flake family and the backbone of 129. You two are close in age and are both extraordinary geniuses. I hope you can get along well in the future."
Having recovered from the initial shock, Sherry turned to Principal White and only faintly nodded. She glanced at Bessy indifferently. Her face was emotionless. Walking away, Principal White solemnly whispered to Bessy,
"Bessy, you must be curious why I placed such emphasis on Sherry."
She nodded, indeed curious. She had heard about Sherry more than 100 times over and over again. There were so many intermediate members of 129, so why did Robert and Rosemary admire her so much?
"Actually, Sherry herself isn't very important. The important thing is the people behind her. We fear the 129 people. I'll explain to you slowly after the banquet."
Principal White remained calm. In front of Sherry, even the heads of the 4 big families must show her respect. Who with power here didn't know Jared, the terrorist boss who was in the International Trade Center? And Giant Crocodile. He had even ransacked the Austria History Museum collection that year, and Interpol had yet to catch him. Clarissa and Slagdragon didn't need to be introduced either. No one had dug out their current situation. As for Lone Wolf, he had a godlike existence in 129, and others didn't dare say much. Any of them had power equal to the 4 big families in Evanston. In so many years, Sherry was the only one who had successfully joined 129 and reached the intermediate level. Episode 438. Return to Austria. Okay. Bessy nodded slightly. No one knew the strength of Giant Crocodile and Jared better than her. It was actually understandable how fearful people in Evanston were of them. Mr. White and the others took Bessy around the room. He was taking her to toast with important people to lay down the basic connections for her. The banquet lasted a long time. By 2 p.m., the party finished eating, drinking, and talking. Today, the White family and Bessy had caused a big hoo-ha. Everyone in Evanston needed time to digest this at home, especially since no one knew what Mr. White and Mr. Clark were planning. President Flores and Dr. Weatherby walked out of the White family's gate together, stopping by their cars. President Flores glanced up at the sky.
Evanston, I'm afraid it's going to witness some big changes.
He wondered if the structure of the 4 major families was going to be broken. The White family had put in so much effort to break into Austria's market. Would Evanston's Research Institute embark on Austria again? In the hall, Bessy and Michael were still there. Only after sending the other guests off did Mr. White take Kenneth and his brother to Bessy. His brother was still in a daze as he stared at her. He finally understood what Kenneth meant by sufficient ability. Mr. White rested his eyes on Michael, and Michael politely greeted him.
Mr. White, Bessy.
Mr. White ignored him and pondered over his words before solemnly turning to her.
Our White family has broken into Austria's market. In 3 days, the White family is going there. I hope you can join us.
Me? Bessy paused. She thought about the laboratory and hesitated slightly. If she made a trip to and from Austria in the most difficult period of time, it was certainly a waste of time.
Go.
Seeing her hesitation, Michael pursed his lips, coughed slightly, and whispered to her. He had to handle some business there, too. Bessy glanced at him. Austria was a little dangerous, and she could remain like a shadow there. But in the future, both the White family and the Research Institute had to do business with Austria. She thought about it and agreed. Principal White heaved a sigh of relief. After sending them away, his brother, standing beside him, asked,
Are you sure you want Miss Miller to follow them to Austria?
Since she had been there before and had the pass, he wasn't worried about her entrance.
Yes.
Principal White looked away.
Call all those in charge and those above for a meeting.
The butler beside him nodded and went to inform the White family members. Half an hour later, at the White family meeting, everyone above the management level in the White family glanced at Principal White silently. Before today, some had planned to join hands to defy Mr. White's successor, but after today, even if the successor wasn't protected by the Clark family, they couldn't use the ability as a reason to object. A 21-year-old had won first place in the ICNE, in a group with an average age of less than 21. What else was she besides a genius? The only thing that could be found was her qualifications. Mr. White was already trying his best to make it up for her. The White family really couldn't find any loopholes. Most people admired her before that and had wanted to win her over. But after this incident, winning her over became full of apprehension. There was no way. Bessy was already connected to the Clark family. What would happen to the Research Institute after this? If she really held authority, would the Research Institute belong to the White or the Clark family?
Today's meeting is mainly to discuss our second transfer to Austria. Kenneth will lead the team. Most of the personnel have already been selected, and they will set off with Mr. Carlo in 3 days. Bessy will come along.
Principal White sat on the main seat and said in a calm tone, but he threw a bomb on everyone else.
Hey, no, absolutely not.
A consul directly stood up and objected.
Mr. White, I know you value Bessy, but why does she have to do this? To gain insights.
Glancing lightly at the speaker, Principal White continued.
She's also Mr. Grint's apprentice and has connections with the Moss family. But she has never experienced this before. It's easy for her to mess up and accidentally anger the Moss family.
Some people were worried. Mr. White's remarks had aroused strong opposition amongst some, but Principal White turned a deaf ear to them. When he left, the people sitting at the conference table turned to Kenneth on the left, looking concerned.
Kenneth, why don't you persuade him? Forget that he found an outsider to take over the research institute. He's even letting her get in touch with our core transactions. We're not going to Austria for leisure travel, nor to participate in competitions. We have to fight at every turn.
First, it was the successor, and now it was the core transactions. The White family really doubted whether Principal White had downgraded. Kenneth had also thought of all these things. After pondering for a while, he stood up.
In these 2 days, I'll add another team of guards with passes.
The White family's atmosphere wasn't good. At Mr. White's house, he had returned to change his clothes. Norman stood beside him, hesitant to speak.
Are you doubting Bessy?
Mr. White glanced at him. Norman hesitated and nodded.
Yes, Miss Miller.
She was indeed excellent, but Mr. White was too concerned and had just handed over the Research Institute to her as well as Austria's affairs. This showed his blatant trust in her. But the human heart wasn't so simple. Buttoning his coat, Mr. White glanced at Norman and lightly said,
Because she's Claudius's granddaughter.
40 years ago, Claudius had been forced to withdraw from Austria. She had to withdraw from Evanston, as well as from the Research Institute. 40 years later, her heir had returned to Evanston, to the Research Institute. They were once again connected to Austria. Episode 439. Hope for the future of the Miller family. The Research Institute was closely related to Evanston and the White family. How could Principal White look for a successor so casually? He recognized Bessy's family the moment he followed Scarlett to Fairfield. Originally, he didn't intend to involve them in the Research Institute anymore, but Bessy's talent in the process made it hard for him to give up. She was used to being undisciplined, but her persistence in one aspect was comparable to that of Claudius. He had stayed in Chicago for 3 years. Upon hearing this, Norman's lip tightened, and he stood there for a long while before nodding.
I see.
After a moment, Norman looked up again.
Mr. Wilson, his former confidant, is still in the Research Institute, right?
In the beginning, Norman had been worried. Bessy was so young and had no qualifications to suppress those who were older and had been there for so long, especially Director Fielder. But she was Claudius's granddaughter, so it was different. Several of Claudius's previous researchers, like Caleb, had become one of the 5 special researchers. Back then, many people had been indebted to Claudius. With them around, coupled by the intimidation of the White and Clark families, Bessy's path ahead wasn't too difficult.
I'm not sure, but...
There had been many people under Claudius. 40 years later, these people were certainly not simple anymore, and their achievements were certainly no lower than that of Caleb. Principal White paused slightly.
Professor Wilson should have left her clues.
Outside, Michael and Bessy calmly walked on the road. Why are you going to Austria this time? Bessy turned sideways. Casually hooking her fingertips with one hand, he turned to look at her.
I have to handle the Underground Alliance.
Oh. Bessy lowered her head. She shut up. He turned to look at her again, thinking she would ask more questions. Who knew that as soon as he finished speaking, she would fall silent and walk quietly with her eyes looking down. He raised an eyebrow.
Bessy, you...
He was about to say that she looked a little guilty when he saw a group of people waiting by the parking lot. He swallowed his words and glanced at them, pausing slightly. It was the Clark family. Joshua and Rosemary had already known about this several days ago, and their absence at the banquet was surprising. A few security guards stayed in place waiting for them. As soon as Michael appeared, Rosemary stepped forward.
Brother, Bessy, why haven't you left?
Michael looked up. His tone was obviously unhappy. Rosemary ignored him and turned to Bessy, not really knowing what to say. This was the first time she talked to her about this after knowing she was Mr. White's successor.
Bessy, you're really... Evanston hasn't been so exciting for many years. My father almost called the family doctor.
Although Joshua hadn't needed the doctor that night, he had been in very stable condition for half a year. In the past few days, under the instructions of professionals, he had added a pill after every meal. Joshua pretended to be calm with his hands behind him. Michael looked up.
Let's head back.
Other than a few people in the Clark family who knew that Bessy was the successor chosen by Mr. White, everyone else had yet to return to their senses and were still a little shocked. Not far away, Aaron finished talking to Sherry and glanced over, stunned.
Sir, do you want to go over and greet them?
His confidant asked in a low voice. If Bessy had been just a student who passed the laboratory exam, she would still mean nothing to him, even if she was a little famous on the internet. But now, her identity as Mr. White's Research Institute successor was enough to make him take her seriously, especially since he could tell from Mr. White's attitude how much he valued her. Even Kenneth, who had always been cold, looked familiar with her, and even stayed with her throughout the toasts. When he first learned about Bessy, Aaron always thought she would be Michael's biggest shortcoming. Who knew that Michael didn't have any ambitions, but she had virtually added a lot of chips to Rosemary. Rosemary's authority was increasing in the Clark family. Aaron's potential threat was now her. Rosemary herself was no different from before, and the only difference was that she was now close to Bessy. Aaron had also vaguely inquired about Giant Crocodile's case and realized it had something to do with Bessy. Aaron said nothing. He had felt disdainful when his confidant asked him to approach Bessy, but now he already regretted it. If he had known sooner, he wouldn't dare underestimate her. Thinking of this, he took out his phone and sent a message to Sherry.
Do you have news on Giant Crocodile?
In the Park Place apartments, Jack was about to lay down on the sofa. His face was flushed, and he held the phone with shaking hands as he called Film God, who was still in Austria. His manager picked up the phone instead.
Jack, Zeke is filming. What's the matter?
The manager walked aside and lowered his voice.
It's great news. God has blessed the Miller family.
Jack murmured, his head floating. The Miller family had faded out of Evanston for so long, but today, because of Bessy's affairs, the family had once again resurfaced. As soon as the banquet was over, many of the older members of the Miller family called him. It took him a long time to organize his words, and he slowly said,
Bessy was just appointed by Mr. White to be the successor of the Research Institute.
Episode 440. Obvious Rejection. In Austria, after hanging up, Jack quivered in the cold, doubting what he had just heard. After a while, Zeke was finished filming and he reached out to pick up the coat on the chair. His assistant quickly passed him a bottle of water.
What's the matter?
He put on his coat and took a sip of water.
No, your niece.
The manager looked up and stared at him before finally sputtering.
Is she a genius?
Hearing this, Zeke paused with the bottle in his hand and narrowed his eyes. The manager searched for a long time before finding the right words to describe Bessy.
The patriarch from the White family had chosen her for the Research Institute's successor 4 years ago. I heard he even stayed in Chicago for 3 years because of her. Tell me, how smart is she?
After the Miller family's assessment last time, he already felt she was a genius. She excelled in both computer science and nuclear engineering. Wasn't she a genius? Zeke's assistant was also familiar with the forces in Evanston. He immediately knew who Mr. White was. He came to a quick realization.
No wonder she went to college despite how good her programming and music talents are.
They both turned to Zeke at the same time.
Film God, are you all right?
He lightly glanced up at them, speechless. He looked rather calm. Looking at the calm Zeke, the manager raised an eyebrow. A leading actor on the other side came to find Zeke to discuss the script. Zeke nodded and walked over. Staring at his back for a long time, the manager couldn't help but smirk.
I thought he was calm.
He was walking with stiff legs. What a rare sight. In Evanston at the Highline Apartments, Bessy had just come back. While talking to her, Rosemary crossed her legs.
Are you going to Austria again? Be careful. I seemed to hear from the head security guard that it hasn't been peaceful there recently.
Marvin saw them and quickly went to the kitchen to pour water. First he poured a cup for Bessy and Rosemary. Bessy took a sip and nodded slightly at him. Michael took off his jacket, still pinching his phone with his fingers. Hearing this, he glanced at Rosemary, about to say something, when his phone rang. It was a number from Austria. He casually looked down and went upstairs to take the call while they were still talking.
Chairman Hall,
he said in a low voice. It was Brandon who called. His voice was a little heavy.
Where have you been recently?
Entering his study and closing the door, Michael raised an eyebrow.
Evanston, I'll be going to Austria in 2 days. Something happened to your hand again?
You're smart.
On the other end, Brandon stood by a tree and lit a cigarette.
Since I haven't made a move in a few years, Black Eagle should probably have figured out what happened to me. He wants the position of the chairman.
Brandon's hand had been injured a few years ago, and Michael had helped to do an operation on him. Although it seemed to be intact now, the sensitivity wasn't as good as before. This level was naturally insignificant to ordinary people, but to Brandon, he was a hacker, so his hands and the computer were equivalent to his life. His hands had too much influence on his strength, but he had been hiding it. Although he was the president of the Hacker Alliance, the organization was divided into 2 forces and was unstable. Some stood by his side and would abide by the rules of hackers. Another half did not abide by hacker morality, like Black Eagle and Gardner. Brandon was well aware that once news of his incident came out, those people would definitely find the right time to pull him off the horse. The hacker community would then be in chaos. As the leader in the hacker industry, he had to maintain his mission. In the past few years, he had recruited many emerging people in the hacker world, just to find the hacker who conformed to the 3 views and who would then inherit the position as the chairman of the Hacker Alliance. He would then retreat. He had once thought about Emmanuel, but his fatal point was that he learned programming.
Black Eagle? That's indeed troublesome.
Michael sat down on the chair next to his desk and frowned slightly. He had also helped to cover up Brandon's news. How did this leak out? Black Eagle was a hacker ranked in the top 10, who regarded money as his fate. He could do anything for money and had once attacked Samuel's computer in Chicago without a trace. Matthew had been keeping an eye on him for a long time.
He challenged me a week later. I have 2 students under me. They're definitely not his opponents. Come over by then.
Looking up, Brandon took a deep breath.
I was thinking of raising my lost niece, but now it's too late.
Having said this, he couldn't help but sigh. It was too inconvenient to say too much through the phone.
We'll talk more when you arrive in Austria. Okay.
Michael nodded. After hanging up, he turned on the computer and began to check Brandon's case. 3 days later, in the early morning, the White family had set off to Austria. Michael had already flown in advance to Austria the night before, leaving Bessy and Marvin a step behind. The White family met at the airport at 7 a.m. Bessy and Marvin arrived soon after. The others in the White family were talking in the ticketing area when they saw her. They immediately stopped talking and went silent. It was an obvious rejection. Episode 441. Things are getting exciting in Austria.
Damn.
The butler beside Mr. White's brother said in a low voice.
What was Eric thinking? He actually asked her to come on the trip, even though he has already given the research institute to an outsider? What's the use of a researcher like her to us?
If only Bessy was a member of the research institute and could contribute to it, the White family would treat her warmly and politely, and not with this attitude. But now, Bessy was an outsider who had relations with the Clark family. The White family was angered after finding out that she would be the one taking over the research institute. Kenneth, wearing a dark windbreaker, stood to the side. His expression was cold and he remained silent. He lifted his head when Bessy appeared. Looking at her with his dark eyes, he hesitated before saying, "Congratulations." Casually unbuttoning her jacket, she glanced at him and replied, "Thank you." Her voice was emotionless. Finishing her sentence, she put on her headphones and started listening to music, disregarding everyone around her. As always, she was cold and arrogant. Kenneth looked at her back. He had many questions and doubts, including why she tried to hide her experiment and the situation with the violin. Seeing her with the headphones on, he swallowed his words. It was 7 o'clock when Mr. Carlo hurriedly appeared.
Mr. Carlo.
The White family members respectfully greeted him when he arrived. Carlo nodded slightly while scanning the group. His gaze stopped at Bessy. Judging from the banquet a few days ago, Carlo thought that Bessy must be part of the White family. As for what it was, Carlo did not dig further. He had no interest in the forces in the country. However, the Moss family always had a fixed number of people. Bessy was the only woman on the team.
Mr. White wanted to let Miss Miller gain some exposure. Don't worry, she will not hinder us.
Seeing Mr. Carlo's unhappiness, Mr. White's brother anxiously came out to explain. Hearing his explanation, Carlo frowned.
Bringing her to gain exposure?
It was like he was speaking in a foreign language. Mr. White's brother lowered his head again to explain. Carlo took a final look at Bessy. With the White family's guarantee, he decided not to speak further on the issue. Marvin was carrying a huge suitcase and followed behind Bessy. He looked at Carlo blankly after hearing his words.
That's Mr. Carlo. He is the leader of the arena for the Moss family.
Kenneth explained to him as he saw him looking at Carlo.
The Moss family is one of the most powerful forces in Austria.
Although the arena was one of the forces under the Moss family, to those from Evanston, he was considered very influential. Bessy's music was very loud. She didn't hear Kenneth's words. She lowered her head to look at her phone. Michael had left her a message saying that he had arrived in Austria and was seeing patients. Bessy quickly replied before heading off with the others. Everyone sent from the White family was an elite. There were about 30 people, but Bessy didn't know what was happening. The others actively avoided her and only told her that this would help the Moss family suppress a gathering sight. Leaning on her chair and overhearing some details, Bessy pulled down her eye mask and stopped listening. The plane landed after 8 hours. At this time, Kenneth and his brother didn't know that something exciting would happen in Austria. At the same time, at the Hacker Alliance's stronghold, a black car with a small flag stopped by the main door. The driver and the passenger got out of the car. The passenger was tall, with a cold expression. It was Michael. Clarence politely waited by the main door, not daring to look at him.
Mr. Clark,
Clarence said respectfully with his head down.
Mr. Hall is waiting for you in the room. Yes,
Michael replied with a low voice and followed him in. The site was cleared, and they did not encounter many people along the way as Clarence brought him straight upstairs. Upstairs, Michael was helping to check Brandon's hand recovery status.
How is it?
Brandon asked, sitting on a recliner. Michael shook his head and took out a box of white pills.
These are experimental drugs that can help to relieve your pain. I cannot help much with your dexterity.
Brandon wasn't disappointed. He smiled, then sighed.
Your skills are excellent. You can even fix severed hands.
Was it very troublesome?
Clarence served a cup of tea and Michael took a sip.
Black Eagle is ranked top 10. I'm the only one that can deal with him in the Hacker Alliance.
Brandon looked out the window holding a white medicine bottle.
There's someone else, but...
They didn't know what he was thinking about as he shook his head. Michael wasn't interested in the Hacker Alliance's internal affairs. He put down the teacup and said,
Is it 4 days later?
As he was chatting with Brandon, he checked the message from Bessy.
Yes, this time Black Eagle is very aggressive and seems to be coming for the Hacker Alliance.
Brandon frowned.
I will try my best to defend it.
Michael nodded. Without saying much, he sent a message to Bessy.
There's something interesting.
Bessy was a hacker, and every hacker in the world was interested in the Hacker Alliance. She would definitely be interested in the confrontation between the Hacker Alliance's chairman and an elite hacker. Episode 442, The Underground Champion. Michael leaned on the chair lazily. Bessy was truly not interested in many things. Michael was observant. In the past, she was interested in the violin, but in recent years, she seemed to have lost interest in it as well. He figured that the only thing that could gain her interest now was a fight. He obviously did not advocate this. However, she would definitely be interested in a competition between the world's top hackers. He could even take her to meet the Hacker Alliance's chairman. Michael explained the situation to her. Bessy quickly replied, "Not interested." On the other side, Bessy had already gotten off the plane. 4 vans from the Moss family were waiting for their arrival. There was a triangular flag on the left side of the van, and she casually took a look at it. Bessy walked towards the last van and sat on the last row of seats. She continued to use her phone. Michael sent her a question mark. He was surprised that he had miscalculated her interest.
You're not even interested in this? What else are you interested in?
It wasn't as cold as the first few days of February. Bessy was wearing a black down jacket and even buttoned the hood on it. She looked at Michael's message and replied to him. She then fished out her headphones and put them on. Marvin, carrying the suitcases, entered the van after her. The van had 2-seater and 4-seater rows. He scanned the van and then took a seat beside Bessy. Carlo answered a call and said a few words to Kenneth and his uncle. He then left in a hurry. Kenneth, his uncle, and Carlo were also in the last van. There was an empty seat beside Carlo. Marvin also sat beside Bessy on the plane, so Kenneth did not have the opportunity to speak to her. Kenneth's uncle originally wanted to talk to Kenneth. Seeing him pondering about whether to sit beside Marvin, he did not speak further. The atmosphere in the car was solemn.
Kenneth, how long will the drive take?
Marvin had stayed there for more than 6 months and was familiar with the roads. He could tell that this wasn't the road to Austria's boundary. Kenneth looked up at the sky.
We will be going through the mountains and will be there by tomorrow morning. Will there be a rest stop along the way?
Marvin asked while nodding.
We can toast some bread.
The White family member sitting in the car frowned. Couldn't he tell the urgency of the matter? How did he still want to stop to toast bread? But because he was Marvin, someone from the Clark family, they didn't dare to talk back and could only swallow their annoyance. Kenneth shook his head and paused before saying,
No, we cannot stop. Okay.
Marvin expressed his regret. 4 hours later, the car stopped at an intersection. After waiting for 3 minutes, about 10 cars drove over. A tall man with brown hair got out of the last car and sat directly beside Carlo. Both parties did not speak and went their separate ways. The car continued on its journey. 2 hours later, the car stopped at a stronghold. Carlo got out of the car first and opened the door for the man with brown hair. The sky was bright. Under the morning light, they could see that the man was almost 6.5 feet tall, wearing a t-shirt and was very muscular.
Mr. Fisher.
Carlo stood beside the car and greeted respectfully. The man with brown hair nodded slightly, but he didn't know that it shocked the rest of the White family members. Although the White family had helped to open the economic lifeline of the Moss family, they did not have the same status. Mr. Carlo, the leader of the arena, had the highest position of those who interacted with them. Why did Carlo greet the man with brown hair so respectfully? Mr. Fisher? Who was he?
Kenneth?
Kenneth's uncle's heart jumped, and he looked at Kenneth for an answer. Although Kenneth and Mr. White had visited Austria previously, this was the first visit of many White family members. Kenneth pondered for a long while, and there was a trace of seriousness in his cold eyes. He shook his head and said,
We have not seen him before.
Bessy and the others slowly got out of the car. She took off her headphones and pulled down her hood. February wasn't as cold as December. However, Bessy always wore long sleeves. Even in summer. She put her hands in her pocket and looked towards Mr. Fisher. Finishing the conversation with Mr. Fisher, Carlo turned to Kenneth and the others. He took 2 steps towards them. He wasn't as respectful when speaking to them.
Your residential area is the 3rd district. The 1st district is Mr. Fisher's training site. Do not enter, or else you will bear the consequences.
Marvin stood beside Bessy with the suitcases. He looked at Mr. Fisher and could sense a dangerous aura.
Miss Miller, do you know him?
Marvin turned to Bessy and asked softly. Kenneth's uncle laughed as he saw his expression. Not caring, he took his equipment and walked towards the 3rd district. The White family members did not think that Bessy would know who Mr. Fisher was. Bessy lowered her head and pulled up her hood. He's the Moss family's underground champion. The Moss family owns the world's largest underground arena. Every underground champion has an extraordinary ability. You can instantaneously have high status as long as you win in the arena. Her voice was soft, but they could understand her. Although Carlo's English was subpar, he understood what she had said. Hearing Bessy's explanation, he said,
Young lady, you must be experienced, since you know who Andre Fischer is.
He was surprised. Andre was famous in the underground arena, and many people knew him. He didn't pursue this further, but kept a mental note of Bessy. Every underground champion had a high status. Other than the Moss family, other forces would spend money to fight for it. Even though the underground arena had been operating for many years, there were only 4 underground champions. Episode 443. She's Not Ordinary. No wonder Carlo treated him with so much respect. Carlo looked at Bessy again and said a few words to the White family members before leaving with Andre to the 1st district. Mr. Fischer. As the two walked away towards the entrance, Andre stopped. Carlo looked up at him. Andre's gaze turned towards the people behind him. He had a pair of dark, cold eyes. Faint blood vessels were visible in them. As his gaze reached the White family members, they took a step back unconsciously. Andre's gaze stopped at a woman in the crowd. That woman looked cool, but did not have a ruthless aura. His thick eyebrows twitched slightly. He shook his head and said,
"It's nothing. I was mistaken."
With that, he went in with Carlo. Those remaining outside were largely the White family members. Was he really the underground champion? Mr. White's brother and the other family members were shocked and turned to Bessy subconsciously. In their minds, they had the same question. How did she know? While the others were shocked, Marvin's expression remained the same. He lifted the suitcases and admired Andre.
No wonder he's a champion. He must be very powerful.
Last year, he had heard Bessy and Captain Baldwin talk about the arena, but Bessy did not allow him to go. Bessy was very familiar with the arena, so Marvin wasn't shocked that she could recognize Andre today. He deeply admired Andre, as he understood that those who fought in the arena weren't scared of death or seeking revenge. Being crowned the champion, Marvin found it deeply admirable. After all, even Captain Baldwin didn't dare to fight in the death match. Kenneth saw that Marvin's expression remained the same. He couldn't help but pause and take another look at him and Bessy.
"Kenneth, follow me."
After Carlo left, the guards brought Kenneth and the others to the 3rd district. The White family was under the Moss family. Other than these top forces in Austria, there were ordinary people as well. To them, the White family had the same status as Carlo. The Moss family's territory was very big. Kenneth and the others stayed in a 3-story house with 10 rooms. Bessy stayed in the innermost room on the 3rd level, and Marvin stayed in the room beside her. Kenneth stayed beside Marvin. Marvin scanned the room. The room was ordinary, without much decoration. He moved the flower vase and checked the room again before leaving. Bessy slept the entire day. At 5 p.m., Marvin woke her up for dinner. The house was air-conditioned. Bessy put on a coat and went out.
"Michael called me in the afternoon. Miss Miller, do you want to call him back?"
Marvin followed behind her, holding his cell phone. "Got it." Bessy rolled up her right sleeves and indifferently replied. Downstairs, Kenneth and his uncle did not sleep and followed Carlo around the base.
"What's she doing?"
One of the White family's representatives looked upstairs and frowned.
"I heard from Marvin that she was sleeping."
Kenneth's uncle also looked up.
"This is good. She's clever."
Bessy wasn't an ordinary person and had achieved outstanding results at the Research Institute. Her identity was very unique, too. The White family members were jealous of her, or else they would not have tried to stop Mr. White from sending Bessy to Austria. She was clever to avoid getting involved in the White family's matters.
"Mr. Fischer must achieve a good ranking this time around."
Bessy and Marvin came downstairs as Mr. White's brother was speaking. He immediately stopped talking. It was obvious that he wanted to avoid Bessy and Marvin. Bessy did not ask anything. She was clear of the reason Principal White allowed her to come along to Austria. He wanted her to establish her prestige with some of the White family members. It was painstaking. Bessy sat on the seat while thinking of another matter. Kenneth, sitting opposite her, exchanged looks with his uncle and said,
"The allocation was done by the forces in the west of the International Center. I'm not entirely sure of the details."
Kenneth didn't fully understand the forces in Austria. He didn't know who the forces present in the west of Austria were. He told Bessy the purpose of their visit. The area that they were fighting for would be allocated to the White family. Pausing, she lifted her head to look at Kenneth. The forces in the west. No wonder Michael rushed back to Austria. As he was settling the matters with the Underground Alliance, he might also be involved in this. She withdrew her gaze and did not speak again. After finishing her meal, Bessy immediately went up with her phone. Kenneth's uncle and the others exchanged glances. When Kenneth reached the study, they asked,
"Kenneth, what did you say to her? I feel that she's not ordinary."
Kenneth looked out of the window. It was almost 6 p.m. and the sun was setting.
"Your brother won't be wrong regarding who he chooses to trust."
Kenneth turned to his side and lowered his eyes. Kenneth's uncle frowned.
"Don't you think it's strange? She's a student. How did she recognize Andre immediately? We also asked Carlo this afternoon and he confirmed that ordinary people wouldn't know about Andre. Kenneth, she's not ordinary. She was too calm when she talked about the underground champion."
Episode 444, The Abandoned Child. Everyone could tell that Bessy wasn't ordinary. Her expression clearly did not belong to an ordinary person. Although Kenneth's uncle was stunned, he paid attention to Bessy's expression, so he was not mistaken. Kenneth had also felt it. At that time, Marvin was also more calm than shocked. Kenneth turned to look at his uncle.
"Your brother must have his reasons for choosing her. Please don't doubt him."
After that, he walked towards the study table and updated Mr. White on what had happened that day. Kenneth's uncle stood behind him, wanting to speak, but he couldn't think of what to say, so he closed the door and left. It was nighttime soon. Bessy and Michael were having a video call.
"How's the Moss family's market being divided?"
Michael wanted to ask Bessy about her message today on Twitter. However, she wasn't cooperating and he didn't question her further. Bessy leaned on the only chair in the room, frowning. "By the champion."
"So casual?"
Michael laughed. He walked towards the window and opened it.
"It's not casual. They lost several men due to the fight. Besides,
fighting for the champion title is also a game." The allocation of these forces was definitely not random. Bessy looked out her window and smiled. Michael was leaning down, sitting by the windowsill. Hearing this, he immediately stood up.
"Come out with Marvin now. I will send someone to pick you two up."
He quickly got to the point. The division of forces was to be decided by the champion. This wasn't a small matter and was beneficial to the Moss family. But how could the fight be so simple? They would definitely attack Andre first. Bessy did not reply and looked at Michael's window through her screen. "You just smoked." "Definitely."
"That's nonsense."
Michael pressed on his lips and coughed lightly. "Don't worry, I'm cherishing my life now. Nothing will happen to Marvin as well." She didn't care much about it. Michael paused and frowned.
"Don't do anything."
"I won't if it isn't needed." Bessy yawned as she recalled something. "How are your markets allocated?" Did they really need to fight the Underground Alliance?
How are you so familiar with Austria? You even know the changes to the force allocation every 3 years.
Michael laughed and looked at her. Bessy did not reply. He smiled briefly before saying,
I did not participate today.
Bessy hung up. Feeling that something was amiss, she sat up and sent a message to Christopher. Christopher was busy at the moment.
Miss Miller, regarding the market allocation this year, boss gave it to Matthew.
He gave it to Matthew? Bessy sat on the chair and pursed her lips slightly. Matthew and Christopher had always been enemies. The allocation was very important this year. With Christopher, Alexander, and the others' personalities, why would they let it go to their enemy? Bessy looked at her phone and saw a voice message from Christopher. She didn't listen to it. However, her hand tensed up. Michael gave the site to Matthew. There must be some relationship between these two. As she was thinking, a black shadow passed by the streetlights. The moonlight in February wasn't bright. Only the streetlights illuminated the roads. Holding her phone, Bessy went over to Marvin's room without closing the door. Marvin could sense that something was wrong. He heard the noises and saw Bessy. She gestured to him, and they hurried down the 3rd level. Marvin saw someone nearby carefully approaching while swiftly avoiding the corners. He dashed forwards and swiftly stabbed him. This is an ambush. Be careful of explosives. Bessy found a homemade bomb on the edge of the wall. She didn't show much of an expression and said with a clear mind, Go and inform the others. I will continue searching. They split ways. Marvin went in while Bessy stayed outside to look for more bombs. On the 3rd floor, some had already felt that something was amiss when Marvin informed them. Boom! A small reactor in the hallway exploded. Weapons couldn't be brought into the Moss family's territory. The explosive was homemade, so the impact was small.
Kenneth, run! It's an attack!
Kenneth's uncle ran towards Kenneth's room and pulled on his arm. Kenneth took out his phone and kicked open the door to Bessy's room.
Where is she?
Kenneth screamed in panic.
Who knows where she has gone in the middle of the night? Didn't we tell her to not run about in Austria? Kenneth, let's get out of here first. She might already be downstairs.
His uncle said impatiently. The two were the last to rejoin the other White family members. When they were out, they realized that Andre stayed with them in the 3rd district instead of the 1st district. No wonder they were attacked.
Kenneth, get in the car.
His uncle pushed him into the car. Kenneth's hand was on the car door as he looked towards Marvin.
Where's Miss Miller?
Marvin looked behind him.
Miss Miller hasn't come out?
Start driving. Kenneth's uncle rushed the driver. Andre's car had already left. This place was dangerous and seemed like it was about to explode. Kenneth shouted,
Wait! We cannot wait. Let's go.
His uncle was ruthless. The driver was also a member of the White family. He stepped on the accelerator with a serious expression. Episode 445. I'll help you win. The car drove outside. Only the most loyal guards of the White family could be sent to Austria. At this time, Kenneth's safety was the most important, as he was the next in line to be head of the family. His safety was more important than Bessy's. In a hurry, the door wasn't properly closed. Kenneth's uncle thought that Kenneth would calm down once the car had started, so he let go of him. Kenneth did not say much. He shook off his uncle's hand and jumped out of the car. The car was moving very quickly. He rolled along the road until the side of his head hit the wall. He propped his hands on the ground and climbed up before starting to run.
Kenneth!
His uncle went pale and immediately he asked the driver to stop the car. The car screeched as it came to a stop, but was soon masked by other sounds. There were only white family members in the car. They exchanged glances and ran back to the house with their weapons ready. When they reached the 3rd District's front door, they saw a female wearing a hood calmly exiting with a black backpack in her hands. Beside her was Carlo. Marvin was waiting by the front door. Kenneth also stopped by the door. He bent over and panted heavily, and sweat could be seen on his forehead. Kenneth's uncle came to his senses first.
Miss Miller, what are you doing here in a daze? We should leave. The rest have already retreated to the 2nd District.
Before he could finish speaking, Bessy walked towards him. She dumped the contents of her backpack on the floor. There was a rustling noise. About 10 handmade bombs without pins fell to the ground. The White family members were speechless. Kenneth's uncle was also dumbfounded. Bessy didn't bother with them. She looked at Carlo and said, "You can call them back. They did not want to destroy your base. They only wanted to harass Andre." Carlo looked at her deeply and asked,
"May I ask, what's your name?"
It had been 2 days, but Carlo did not remember Bessy's name. "Bessy Miller." Bessy replied lightly.
"Miss Miller, we, the Moss family, will remember today."
Carlo held the walkie-talkie and went out. They would have suffered a huge loss if Bessy wasn't here today. The 1st District was heavily armed with troops, and he transferred Andre to the 3rd District through an underground tunnel. He didn't expect the plan to be leaked. After 20 minutes, they arrived safely at the 2nd District. The room allocation was ongoing, and they gathered on the 1st level. All of them had solemn expressions except Bessy. She sat on the chair beside the dining table playing a game, with her legs propped up. Marvin poured her a cup of tea. Outside the door, Kenneth's uncle looked at her relaxed state. He couldn't help but say,
"Her observation skills are spectacular."
Under those circumstances, even the well-trained guards of the White family panicked. Yet Bessy remained calm and found the remaining bombs that hadn't been detonated. This wouldn't be possible simply due to luck. The guessing of explosives and the number of enemies, even Carlo wouldn't have made such an accurate calculation. Carlo was the leader of the arena. There was no doubt about his abilities. Kenneth's uncle couldn't understand.
"How do you think she did it? When she walked out of the fire, she was calmer than Mr. Carlo."
Kenneth did not speak, but looked at Bessy. From his angle, he couldn't tell what her expression was. She didn't have her usual sharpness, nor did she seem impatient. He couldn't even feel her oppressive energy. Kenneth didn't know what Bessy had gone through in the last year. However, she was definitely different compared to before. Her aura was unfathomable. As the two of them were talking, Carlo came in after he had finished settling his matters. Kenneth turned to look at him and asked,
"What are the losses?" "We arrested the man that you knocked unconscious. There are not many injured. The doctor visited Mr. Fisher. He's resting in the 1st District now. I haven't received any news about his condition yet."
Carlo would no longer look down on the White family after this incident. He looked at Bessy and thanked her again. Bessy was recording a video for Tucker. Hearing this, she raised her eyebrows and said, "No worries." Her hands did not stop. They exchanged a few more words before they heard a car coming to a stop. Andre walked in with a red eye. He looked around the room, and when he saw Bessy, his pupils constricted as he shook his head.
"Mr. Fisher, how are you?"
Carlo immediately stood up and asked,
"I'm okay, only my left eye is hurt."
Andre did not seem to mind his injury. This small injury was nothing compared to a death match. The man beside Andre looked at Kenneth and the others.
"Aren't they?"
Andre coldly glanced at him, signaling for him to stop talking. He immediately shut up. With her leg propped up, Bessy looked at the two of them while thinking. Carlo didn't notice that and was only concerned about Andre's injury. He looked towards the doctor and asked,
"How's his condition?" "His vision from his left eye is blurry. It's hard to say."
The doctor bowed.
"These cowardly people."
Carlo slammed on the table angrily and then took out his cell phone to contact the leader of the Moss family. He had to report about this incident. Andre did not leave. As Marvin wasn't afraid of Andre, he asked him several questions. The rest also gathered in the living room. They were also interested and curious about this underground champion. After Bessy finished recording her video, she stood up and signaled to Marvin. "I'm going out to make a call." Marvin thought that she wanted to notify Michael of their safety and nodded quickly. Not far outside, Carlo was questioning the doctor with the phone in his hands. The doctor said with his head down,
"Blurry vision during a duel. It's really hard to say."
Andre was strong, but the winner would be decided in one match. Bessy crossed her arms and listened to their conversation. Carlo saw her and signaled for the doctor to leave. Before he could speak, Bessy said coldly, "I'll help you win." Episode 446. 1/3 of Austria's Big Shots. Carlo's task this time was to protect Andre. He'd be in deep trouble if anything happened to him. He was the only champion left in the Moss family. The Moss family was in charge of the battlefield, and most of the stronger forces were jealous of the amount of territory they held. People from all forces were fighting for these spots. Christopher and the rest had also had their fair share of fighting for their lives on the battleground. Moreover, many were looking to challenge the champion himself. 4 champions had emerged, but only Andre was part of the Moss family. Although Andre had some issues with his vision, he was still a force to be reckoned with in the field. The Moss family simply couldn't find a better candidate at this point. Upon hearing what Bessy said, Carlo turned to her and asked,
"What's your agenda?"
Bessy said it very seriously, and after the incident with the explosives, he didn't think that she was joking with him. The fact that she could say this meant something about her. "How much market share did you allocate to the White family?" Bessy asked him calmly. Carlo looked at her deeply.
1% of the South region."
Bessy kept quiet. 1% of the region didn't mean much to the Moss family, but it was a rather big deal for the White family who had just entered Austria. She leaned against the wall and tapped her phone casually. "Change it to 1% of the market in the South region's economic center." 1% of this market and the 1% that the Moss family had allocated was different. This referred to 10% of the region Carlo had mentioned. The way Bessy put it, it was evident that she knew the market forces in Austria. The South region was the battle territory of the Moss family. If they could get 3 years of complete management authority, then 1% in the market of the economic center was going to be insignificant to the Moss family. All that the Moss family wanted was the management power. Carlo did have some autonomy in this. He simply nodded and said,
"Sure, tell me your idea, but don't think about the medical team. The doctor just told us that his injury can only recover if he recuperates on his own."
Carlo was expecting that Bessy would recommend him another doctor, but Bessy simply glanced at him and then looked away. "I need you to get me something from the underground arena," she said very quietly. Right after she said that, Marvin waved his cell phone at her.
"Miss Miller, Michael is looking for you."
"Got it." Bessy paused for a moment. She then slipped her hand into her pockets and walked into the house. Meanwhile, Carlo was left standing outside on his own.
Mr. Carlo, are you all right?
Marvin called out to him. Only then did Carlo snap out of his daze. He turned to Marvin, shook his head, and then left. Bessy returned to the hall. The White family and a group of people from the base were surrounding Andre. There were looks of awe and admiration. Marvin followed Bessy in. The White family members around the table made way for Bessy when they saw her enter. Marvin didn't seem to notice it as he asked Andre,
Mr. Champion, what's your boxing value?
Boxing value? Kenneth's uncle and the rest exchanged glances. What sort of term was this? Andre looked at Bessy, then turned to him.
I measure it every day. The last time, it was 1,598. I haven't hit 1,600 yet.
He was speechless. He thought that 1,000 was already impressive. Don't worry, you still have room for growth and improvement. Bessy patted him on the shoulder. She then politely said goodbye to the rest of the people around and left. I'm heading to my room. It was already 3 in the morning. She headed straight up. Bessy seemed a little cold and unapproachable. Besides Marvin, no one else seemed to have anything to say to her. Andre watched her as she left, and a strange glint appeared in his eye. Everyone admired talent and power, especially someone like the champion of Austria's underground arena. The White family members around were all fans and were protective of him.
Mr. Fisher,
a youngster from the White family asked,
is 1,598 considered very good? Less than 5 people in Austria can exceed 1,500.
Andres didn't say a word, but his subordinate said it for him. Kenneth was in shock. Andre had been sitting there quietly the whole time, but after Bessy left, he couldn't remain seated any longer. He took his leave a few minutes later as well. Only the White family members were left standing around. 2 days later, the White family rose early. Kenneth and his uncle waited in the hall for the others. A few minutes later, Marvin came downstairs.
Where's Miss Miller?
Kenneth's uncle asked. Marvin shook his head.
She told me last night that she'd be busy. She might be back only at night. Where could she have gone?
Kenneth's uncle furrowed his eyebrows in concern.
Mr. Carlo already told her not to go around on her own.
Everyone knew that the area wasn't so safe now. It was the peak season for the fights to take place, and Austria was a rather lawless place. Even Kenneth and his uncle wouldn't be going off on their own without Carlo's permission. After what had happened 2 nights ago, most of the White family members no longer had such unpleasant attitudes towards Bessy. Instead, they rather admired her.
It's fine. Miss Miller won't cause you any trouble.
Marvin wasn't actually worried.
She might have gone to the casino.
The southern side was where the landing area for planes was. On the northern side was the world's largest casino. Michael hardly let her go there as there was talk about negative energy around there. Marvin didn't seem the least bit concerned. Kenneth's uncle asked,
Didn't Michael send you here to protect Miss Miller?
Marvin found it a little awkward. No, he was just a gardener.
Head to the wrestling ring first.
Marvin did not wish to carry on that topic.
Miss Miller might have gone there beforehand.
The largest competition in the south region of Austria. 1/3 of all of Austria's big shots were gathered there. Episode 448. KO in the 366th match.
All right then.
Marvin didn't say anything more. He continued watching the match. Andre's loyal fans in the crowd yelled his name.
Andre! Andre!
The MC paused for about 10 seconds as he waited for them to mellow down. He then went on.
Now let's invite the last competitor of the Moss family to the wrestling ring.
With that, The platform on his right slowly rose. Everyone turned in that direction. A black figure appeared. The figure was in a black, loose-fitting training outfit. They didn't have headgear on, but were wearing a face mask. It was dark in color, with red on the sides, and seemed almost like a fiery phoenix. The figure seemed lean and fit, while their long black hair was tied up. There were also ribbons on both sleeves. They had one arm at the back. It was a girl. As the MC introduced her, she raised her head slowly. The look in her eyes was menacing and cold, but also mysterious.
This?
The leader beside Carlo got up and stared at the screen. He was the person who made sure everything went well at the arena. How could he possibly not remember this mask, this terrifying physique? Almost everyone went quiet. Then they suddenly stood up.
It's Phoenix. Phoenix? It's her.
Emmanuel was speechless. The people who had been keeping their eyes on the arena had heard of this legend from over 2 years ago. It was a presence that took over the arena for almost a whole year. A presence that annoyed Mr. Kramer. In just 1 year, this person had attracted tons of fans. But just at her peak, she disappeared all of a sudden, and even the Moss family couldn't track her down. Everyone present recognized her right away.
Who's this? Is she an underground champion too?
Kenneth's uncle felt that this figure seemed oddly familiar, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was about it. Then again, the figure's seemingly ferocious character was distant to him. He asked Marvin since he and Bessy seemed more familiar with Austria. Marvin paused for a moment and then shook his head, then asked the Moss family member beside him.
The person in black is... That's her. The black fiery phoenix is her logo. She's the legend of the arena. Can you believe that?
The man's neck was red from excitement.
She started off being beaten so badly in the first round of the competition, but in just 1 year, she managed to advance to the 11th round, where they'd fight to their death. And nobody dared to challenge her. In the second half of the year, she was practically every fighter's nightmare. Even Andre had his fair share of competitors. Only she did not. As long as she was around, everyone who bet on her would surely win. 100% win rate. She has a 100% clean record in the underground arena. No one has beaten her yet.
The White family and Marvin were stunned as they heard what he said. Behind him, people were chanting the name, Phoenix. The young man from the Moss family sitting beside them was thrilled. He had one hand on the chair for support as he kept his eyes in front.
Look at the payout rate. It's going to flip soon.
The moment he said that, Marvin and Kenneth's uncle turned towards the payout screen. It had flipped indeed. It went from 9.9 to 0.1 to 0.1 to 9.9. Marvin looked at the rates and then turned to the black figure on stage expressionlessly. The White family members were exchanging glances. Only Kenneth looked at the figure quietly. On stage, the MC was excited as well.
That's right, it's the king with a perfect record. Phoenix, the Moss family invited her. Are both of you ready?
He suppressed his excitement and turned to them. Harold looked at the woman opposite him and gestured.
Okay.
The woman raised her arm to give the green light too. The MC raised his right arm and, with sheer joy in his voice, said,
Let the match begin.
He took a step back. In the ring, Bessy calmly looked at the man in the lion headgear opposite her. She put her left arm behind her and bowed down slightly. Please. Harold was a second-generation underground champion, and he'd only been improving over the years. He'd gone through tough, specialized training, and spectators could hear the whoosh when he swung his arm. His speed was terrifying. Bessy calmly watched Harold's arm. She hadn't fought for 2 years, but all of this survival experience was in her blood. How could she possibly forget it? When Harold made a move, she evaded to the side swiftly. She hadn't avoided it completely, but her left hand met Harold's hand with a swift, chopping motion. They each took a step back. Marvin and Kenneth were nervously watching. They could tell that Harold was pretty good.
It seems like Phoenix and Harold's abilities are roughly equal. They are both champion-grade fighters. Let's see if Harold will ruin Phoenix's streak.
The MC's voice was loud and clear.
Phoenix took a step back. Can the Phoenix evade Harold's signature move? Phoenix blocked it. She blocked it with both hands, and she fought back. Gosh, is her boxing value over 1,600 already?
Boom. Harold was lying on the ground, and there was blood at the corner of his mouth. The MC counted to 3, and Harold didn't get up. He couldn't help but yell,
"Congratulations to Phoenix! The 366th match! KO!"
Episode 449. Underground Alliance, Alejandro Schuler. The match lasted for 15 minutes, and the audience watched it intently. After a moment of silence, everyone at the event location stood up after the boom.
"Phoenix! Phoenix!"
Everyone was speechless. The cheers and screams rumbled like thunder breaking through the sky. The bets were closed when the match was over. The winner was the Moss family. The Underground Alliance lost. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the figure beside Harold. Her hands were propped on the ground, and she slowly stood up. Her arrogance and coldness still showed through her eyes. She lifted her right hand and casually wiped the bloodstains outside her mask. She then put down her hands. The cheers stopped abruptly. Bessy turned around and looked towards the west of the stage before going down the escalator. She did not say anything else. Kenneth's uncle couldn't help but touch his back after he felt a chill run down his spine.
It seems like Harold did not dare to continue.
A young man from the Moss family looked at Kenneth's uncle and shook his head.
She always fights to the death. Her opponent would have died if he did not give up. She's very well known in the black market. She fought a death match every day and killed every one of her opponents. Mysteriously, she hasn't lost a single round in the 366 matches she has fought in. This is the reason she's stronger than an underground champion. Her boxing score's almost 1,600. This is 2 times higher than her score 2 years ago. Of course, Harold didn't dare to keep fighting her.
A contract had to be signed before the death match. Whoever was more ruthless won. Those who signed the contract were desperate and had to gamble with their lives. Even Harold and Andre won the champion title only after they received training. In the beginning, the audience of her matches expected her to lose and die. However, she progressed straight from level 8 to level 10 without losing a single match. As long as she competed, she would always win. This was the first time such a person appeared in the black market arena. Her abilities were witnessed by everyone in the arena as she fought her way to fame. Without absolute certainty, why would Harold fight with a crazy person like her? The White family's steward's gaze was fixed on the ring. He turned around and said,
"Don't you think her expression is familiar?"
The arrogant and slender figure of the woman in the ring was indeed familiar. However, the dark aura caused others to retreat. Carlo, sitting in a row in front of them, walked back and handed a document to Kenneth.
"This is the White family's market in Austria. It's 1% of the economic center."
This was different from what he had said previously. Everyone knew that there were huge profits to be made in the economic center.
"Mr. Carlo, why did you suddenly change the market allocation?
Kenneth slowly came to his senses. Carlo looked at him and smiled. He only patted his shoulder and left. He had many other things to deal with. Kenneth licked his lips, and his expression remained cold. He turned around and asked Marvin, "Where's Miss Miller?" Marvin looked at the $500 million he had just received in his bank account. Hearing Kenneth's question, he replied, "She's sleeping in her room." Kenneth was closer to Marvin. He could tell that the person was Bessy. The White family members did not speak much to Bessy, and hence couldn't tell that it was her easily. Upon hearing Kenneth's words, his uncle, who was deep in thoughts, abruptly lifted his head. His mind was clear, but his voice was strained.
"Kenneth, do you mean?"
If Andre had fought today, the outcome might be different. Just before the start of the competition, Bessy disappeared and Phoenix appeared, just in time to help the White family win the most profitable division. Kenneth's uncle looked up. Only the MC was left on the ring. However, the black figure was still projected on the screen. She wiped away the blood on the corner of her lips. Her head was tilted slightly, and her hair moved with the wind. At the west area of the main seating platform, Harold dragged his legs and kneeled on the floor. His voice was trembling.
"Mr. Schuler, I lost. Please punish me."
Harold dragged his legs and kneeled on the floor. His voice was trembling. He was recruited by Underground Alliance when he became the champion 10 years ago. Even though he held a high status in the Underground Alliance, he was still deeply afraid of the man opposite him. The man whose back was facing him was tall, and he was wearing a white sweater with his hands behind his back. He didn't turn around. The light shone on his face, leaving a faint shadow. He was holding onto a green teacup filled with a clear tea. He lowered his head and took a sip. His tone was gentle as he asked,
"How are her abilities?" "She's not afraid of death."
Harold pursed his lips. The man nodded slightly.
"I understand. Go."
Hearing this, Harold slowly lifted his head to look at the man. He couldn't believe it. After making such a terrible mistake, this ruthless man allowed him to leave so easily? Harold paused for a second before frantically standing up and leaving. He closed the door softly. Standing outside were men from the Underground Alliance. They weren't surprised by how embarrassed Harold looked. Inside, after Harold left, the man lifted his head to reveal a handsome face. He had a gentle breath. It was Alejandro. Bam! He smashed the teacup in his hand into pieces. There was an unspeakable silence in the air. The clear tea was mixed with some blood trickling down his hands onto the floor.
"Mr. Schuler."
The man beside him took a step forward. Alejandro lowered his head to look at his hand as his pupils shook.
"Get someone from the Intelligence Bureau to contact me." "Yes, sir."
5 minutes later, they received a video call from a middle-aged man. He respectfully greeted.
"Sir."
Alejandro closed his eyes for a long time before saying,
"The news about her death 3 years ago. How was it verified?"
Episode 450, A Visitor. The middle-aged man knew exactly who Alejandro was referring to. He was dumbfounded and stared at him blankly.
"Sir, you... How was it verified?"
Alejandro cut in. He had always felt that he was too indifferent. However, this was the first time he was interested in someone. After these 2 years, the Underground Alliance was about to lose its status in Austria. To reach such a status, the middle-aged man was good at reading someone from their body language. He knew Alejandro's true colors beneath his gentle demeanor. Hearing that, His heart stopped.
During the fire at the slums, we sent some men to check on all the surveillance cameras. The fire killed 6 people and no one escaped. Her last known location through her cell phone was also in that area.
Most importantly, the middle-aged man felt that she would definitely have contacted them if she was alive.
Really?
Alejandro's eyes were deep as he looked at the middle-aged man indifferently.
Are you still suspecting Miss Miller?
The middle-aged man frowned.
But you know that it's impossible. She's part of the World Poker Tour and is the goddaughter of the old man.
Alejandro reached into his pocket and took out a white handkerchief. He wiped his hands slowly and said,
Arena, Phoenix, give me all the information you can find about them.
Although the Underground Alliance had hackers, it did not have a large information system. The Moss family was the best at investigating. However, Alejandro did not trust them. Ending the call with the middle-aged man, he took out his phone and dialed a number. The call went through after 3 seconds. The other party did not speak. Alejandro did not care much and faintly said,
Father, I have something to discuss with you.
On the other side, in the 2nd District, it was evening when the White family members came back. The servants set the dishes on the table. Marvin went to knock on Bessy's door. She was indeed sleeping.
Miss Miller, are you okay?
He asked by the door. Although Harold lost, his movements were powerful. On the screen, Marvin could clearly tell it was Bessy when she wiped the blood off the corner of her lips. This injury was nothing to Bessy. She shook her head and said while frowning, Bring the food up. I won't head down. Don't tell Christopher and the rest. If Christopher knew about it, Michael would know too. Marvin looked at her and was afraid that Christopher may already know since it was a big deal. However, he nodded and said,
Okay.
He went downstairs. Downstairs there were 2 tables. Kenneth and his uncle sat at one table with 2 empty seats beside them.
Please save a plate for Miss Miller. She's currently writing her thesis,
Marvin explained. The White family members did not mind as Bessy was from the Science and Technology department. It was normal for her to be working on her thesis. Kenneth looked upstairs and frowned.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Someone from the other table raised his glass at Marvin.
Because of you, we bet half of our deposit and won $1.5 million.
Marvin calculated that the person had deposited $300,000. He looked at the person and nodded without saying anything else. Speaking of this, another person was regretting his actions. He sighed and asked,
Marvin, how did you know the Moss family was going to win? Also, Phoenix is a woman. I don't have access to the browser and cannot receive news about the arena. From this day forward, I've decided that Phoenix is my idol.
Sometimes, brotherhood was so simple. After a round of gambling, Marvin had developed a strong friendship with many of the White family members. Marvin lowered his head while eating his meal and mumbled,
I guess.
The captain of the White family guards nodded.
Very impressive.
Those from the White family present were mostly trainers comparable to Instructor Clark. Before this, they always admired Andre. However, with Phoenix's appearance, they turned their attention to her instead. Hearing his words, Kenneth's uncle couldn't resist and asked,
Don't you think that she looks like Miss Miller?
Her face could be covered, but not her figure. One could easily recognize another through their figure if they were familiar enough with someone. Kenneth's uncle wasn't close to Bessy. However, because of ICNE and the issue with the successor, he had paid a lot of attention to her. Although he didn't trust Bessy, he couldn't deny her abilities.
Are you okay?
The captain asked him.
Phoenix from the Moss family was famous in the arena 2 years ago. Back then, Miss Miller was still in high school. How could it be her? Besides, she's a talent at the Research Institute.
Typically, researchers had slender and weak figures. Kenneth's uncle stayed silent. He had his doubts about this. According to information obtained about Bessy, she had always stayed in Chicago. How could she be involved with Austria? After Marvin left, Bessy, who was upstairs, pulled up the blanket and continued sleeping. Her eyes opened abruptly. The room was dark and the curtains were tightly drawn. She looked towards the window. After a while, she pursed her lips and said nothing. After switching the bedroom light on, she put on her slippers and opened the curtains slowly. Through the glass, she could see a figure looking at her motionlessly. Bessy was shocked. She pressed a button and opened the window, allowing the person to enter. Episode 447, $1 Million Bet. There were seats all around the arena. It was full, with almost 10,000 spectators. The matches today were put together by some of the largest powers. The moment word of the Underground Champion's appearance got out, tons of fans flocked to get tickets for this session. Before it even began, cheers could already be heard at the entrance. The White family members were slightly shocked by the enthusiasm all around. The word bets was hung at each entrance. This was the rule of the game. They were to place their bets for whoever they supported. Everyone had their eyes on the fourth match of the day, the match involving the Moss family. News of this match had already been spread for half a month. Although it was well known that Andre suffered an eye injury, it didn't stop the supporters from admiring or believing in him. Kenneth wasn't interested in this. His uncle and the other White family members placed their bets on the Moss family and then headed for the spectator area. They had designated seats, the first 3 rows of the block, right beside Carlo and the others. Marvin sat right beside one of the people in charge from the Moss family and didn't feel anything off about it. Kenneth's uncle sat on Marvin's right and turned to ask Kenneth,
Kenneth, are we sitting in the wrong place?
Carlo was sitting in the row in front of them. The huge Moss family was behind them. It wasn't that his uncle despised the White family, but their seats were way too good. Kenneth leaned back in his chair and thought about it. He remembered what Bessy did the night before.
Maybe because of Bessy,
he said quietly. But something seemed wrong. Kenneth furrowed his brows slightly. His uncle did not think too much. He just kept his eyes on the center of the ring. There were 4 huge screens around the arena to ensure that even the spectators in the back could have a good view. The first 3 rounds involved other powers and forces, but not the Underground Champion himself. Even so, the matches were rather exciting. The overhead cameras captured all the details and highlights in the ring.
This one.
His uncle took a deep breath after watching the 3 consecutive matches. None of them involved the Underground Champion yet. After a few minutes of intermission, the MC, dressed in black, emerged once again. The 4th round. The Underground Champion that everyone had been waiting for. Holding the microphone, he excitedly announced,
This is the match we have all been waiting for. The duel between the Underground Alliance and the Moss family. Let's welcome Harold from the Underground Alliance.
As he made the announcement, a platform rose in the middle of the ring, to the left of the MC. On the screen, everyone could see the carved golden lion on the black headpiece that he was wearing. His build was bulky and intimidating. The threatening look in his eyes couldn't be mistaken. The crowd went mad as he appeared.
Harold! Harold!
Kenneth was speechless. This was the loudest chant he had heard. Even his uncle and Marvin's blood was pumping.
Who's this Harold?
Bessy wasn't around, so Marvin asked someone from the Moss family. Although this person had never seen Marvin before, he was polite to him as he saw that he was sitting in the second row.
This is the second underground champion, Harold. The golden lion mask is his icon. After making a name for himself, he went missing for some time. Nobody could have expected that he'd sign under the Underground Alliance. It was only after he left that Andre became so well known. They've never fought before.
Although this was a fight between the Underground Alliance and the Moss family, the Moss family members couldn't help but cheer for Harold as well.
So, it was Harold that the Underground Alliance found.
Before them, the team leader sitting beside Harold sprung to his feet.
Has Andre's vision recovered yet? No.
Carlo shook his head.
Mr. Fisher's eye is an old injury. Medication won't cure it. Then how is Andre going to fight Harold? He's been out of the scene for years. Who knows how good he could be by now? Andre's eye is still injured. That will affect his performance.
The team leader seemed a little concerned. As he expected, the Moss family supporters were in shock.
It's Harold. Moss family, you're too disappointing.
The payout rate for the Moss family was shown to be 3.9, but it was still rising. It soon reached 9.9. Evidently, many people threw in all their life savings after seeing how much money the Underground Alliance was using to bet on their victory. They were betting on the Underground Alliance too. Marvin was just sitting there. His cell phone suddenly vibrated and he saw that it was a notification from Bessy. She simply asked him to bet on the Moss family. Marvin checked how much balance he'd had left on his card. It wasn't much. He sent Patrick a message.
Bro, lend me $5 million.
Patrick did not ask a thing. A minute later, Marvin received the notification from the bank. After receiving the money, he transferred it into his betting account and put in $5,100,000.
Mr. Clark, if you're putting in so much, you should be putting in for...
Kenneth's uncle seemed a little worried for the Moss family. He couldn't help but turn to look at Marvin after seeing his bet. When he saw the $5,100,000, he had thought that Marvin was betting on the Underground Alliance as well. But when he saw the change in rates, he realized that it was the Moss family? Was he mad? Kenneth's uncle asked him,
Did you choose the wrong option?
Marvin looked down at Bessy's message, then at the blue team, the Moss family, that he'd bet on. He shook his head.
Nope. Mr. White, you can continue increasing your bet too. It's a 9.9 payout rate. You can get rich overnight.
Kenneth's uncle knew that the people around Michael were all fairly rich, but his heart was already aching from the $250,000 bet. He shook his head and said,
No thanks.